Well, hello everyone and welcome back. So you've got your iPad card with last year's student iPads in them. But you have a challenge that we didn't have to face last year, and that is this. Each of those iPads contains all of the random data, documents, ebooks, photos, videos, and educational game progress put on there by last year's students. We've got to get rid of that. So after extensive collaboration, research, and testing with Kay Little, she and I have put together a video, and that's the good news. If you will follow this video, long though it may be, to the T, step by step, we will guide you through each step of the process, and that involves four main parts. One is streamlining your iTunes app library, making sure that you only have apps in it that you really intend to use. Two, making sure both iTunes settings and iPad settings are consistent and going to run smoothly. Three, create your new student master. And finally, four, replicate or duplicate that to the rest of your set. I can tell you this, if you will follow this video step by step, pausing it when you need to, this will work for you. So have a go, and Kay and I will see you on screen.
Alright, so the next step is to clean up your apps library in iTunes. Last year you might have found that with a lot of apps on your computer, it took a long time to sync and to update. So it might be good to start smaller. You can delete apps you don't want to start the year with. They'll still be there under your purchased apps that you can get to later, but it's really nice to just start smaller. It'll make the whole process a lot quicker.
Before we tidy up our iTunes library, we want to make sure that our directions match your screen. So the first thing you'll see in this next clip is how to update your iTunes to the latest version. So we're in iTunes, but before we do anything else, let's make sure that your buttons match the buttons in this walkthrough. And in order to do that, we're going to make sure and update iTunes to the latest version. So on the iTunes menu, click Check for Updates. And most of you will see that there's an available version called 11.0.5. So you're going to click Download iTunes. And no, we won't make you sit and watch this through the walkthrough. It will check, and when it finds one, eventually it's going to show you a software update window. You can say Show Details, and you might see quite a list. I only want you to worry about two right now. We're going to uncheck everything but iTunes, and if you see anything with the word Java, leave that checked as well, and then click Install. Okay, so this may happen to you. It wants to reinstall the application, but it sees that iTunes is running. So we're going to click Close Applications and Install, and that's just going to automatically close iTunes for us while it reinstalls the new version. Now that it's closed, it's installing. Once the two updates we selected finish updating, Apple prompts you to update the rest. We're going to skip that by clicking Not Now. Once that window closes, just reopen iTunes. Alright, so now that we're all using the same version of iTunes, this is what you'll probably see at the beginning. And just in case you don't have this sidebar, they call it, where you have your list of iPads, etc. If yours looks like this, with no sidebar, just go to View, Show Sidebar, and then you're back in the familiar view that we're all used to. Okay, so to tidy up our apps library, as Kay mentioned, we're going to go under the library section and click on Apps. And this is where you really want to get ruthless with apps that you really just don't feel are absolutely necessary at the beginning, because as Kay said, it's always easier to add them back in than to delete them off of 24 iPads. So we're going to go through and find some that we don't really care about anymore, and Kay has authorized the deletion of these. So I just held down the command button and selected several, and then I'm going to right click and hit delete. It's going to ask you, are you sure you want to delete? Remember, you can always get these back from your purchased section. So yes, we're going to go ahead and delete. And we want to move them right to the trash. Okay, so now pretend we've gone through all of this and tidied this up, gotten rid of versions we don't care about, and now would be a good time to check for updates of those apps so that when we copy them to all of the iPads, they'll all have the latest version. So we've gotten rid of apps we don't care about. Now we're going to click on Updates and Update All Apps. We won't make you sit through this. This would be a good time to pause the video and let them update. Some of you may have a tremendous number of updates that take quite a while to download. Give them their time, make sure that all downloads are complete before going on to the next step. Once your screen shows this little message in the middle, all apps are up to date, you'll know that that update process is complete. So there's one more step in iTunes before we deal with the iPad itself, and that is we need to check the settings under iTunes menu and preferences. There are some specific settings here that can really goof you up. So what I would suggest is that as we go through each tab or button section up here, you might just want to pause the video after a little brief explanation and make sure that your checkboxes match what you see on the screen here. So on General tab, make sure all of these top section checks are filled in, and the rest of these should be as seen here. The views, you probably won't have to change anything, but the last checkbox is important. We want to uncheck this one that says check for new software updates automatically. We're going to decide when we do that so that it's not constantly pestering us to update. Okay? Under playback, you can leave this one completely as it comes by default. Same thing with the sharing tab. You can leave this at its defaults. Under store, you can leave these as their defaults, except you want to make sure that these three boxes are unchecked. Otherwise, as soon as something is downloaded on another device, like your husband or your wife downloads an app on their iPhone under your same iTunes account at home, they'll start showing up in your apps library, so uncheck these for sure. Same thing with books. So everything here is unchecked. Parental controls for ratings of apps and movies, you can leave those at their defaults. All right, the Devices tab. There are two important elements of this. One is make sure that both of these boxes are checked. You definitely want to prevent iPods, iPhones, and iPads from syncing automatically. This doesn't mean you can't sync them, but when you just plug them in to charge, you don't want them going through all this long process of syncing, so make sure those are checked. Under device backups, it's important that we delete the backups from last year, including your original master. So we're going to delete all of these. I'm going to do that by clicking on them, and I'm going to hit delete backup. It'll say, are you sure? Yes. Just go through. You might have 25 of them. Delete them all. You can't see it. I'm just confirming to delete. Okay, we're done with the Devices tab. Okay, and then last on the Advanced tab, you should be able to leave these at their defaults. Just in case these aren't checked, make sure that they are. And then you can click OK and you're basically done. Alright, one of the first steps we want to do to make this go more smoothly is we're going to take out last year's iPads, all of them, including your number one that we'll use as a master, and we're going to reset those to wipe all that student data that we don't want. And we're going to do that by taking all the iPads out, turning them on, and then we'll do it quickly together. This process actually is very fast. You're going to go to Settings, General, swipe all the way to the bottom. We're going to hit Reset, and the second choice, Erase all content and settings. It's going to make you double check. You keep saying, are you sure? Yes, we're going to erase. Now this line will fill up very quickly. It should be done in about 5 seconds. Boom, there it goes. It looks like it shut off. What it's doing is it's restarting. And you don't have to sit and wait for that. So it would go like this. I go Settings, General, scroll to the bottom, Reset, erase all content and settings, erase, erase. Boom, I go on to the next one. General, Reset, erase all content and settings. So I'm not having to wait for any of these. By the time I get done with my whole set, this one will be done. I can close it up, put it back in the cart, and just don't plug in the sync cable. So this one is done. Now, great news here. You get to that opening screen, you do not have to mess with these settings. None of those have to be tweaked here because we'll only do that one time, and all those setup routines will be replicated from that one master iPad. So don't waste your time going through this. We'll do it just one time on the master. We've removed iPad 1. That's the only iPad where we will make a settings adjustment. We did this last year. Select the language, scroll way to the bottom where you'll find United States, and you're going to keep clicking Next. It's important that you enter the Wi-Fi code for this section because you'll need it when we verify this iPad with your iTunes account. So go ahead and make sure you reference the materials that have the student iPad code. And join. Okay, and as soon as that check mark appears, we're going to click Next. Okay, continuing, location services are enabled, so go ahead and enable. We're going to say set up as new iPad. Make sure that's checked and hit Next. And we're going to skip this step for now. It's hard to click, but the very bottom is just a little teeny line. Skip, and they'll make you confirm. You're going to agree to the terms in the lower right. Hit agree again. For the students, I'm going to click Don't Use Siri. And Next. And for diagnostics, we're going to tell it not to send. We don't want to use Wi-Fi any more than necessary. Okay, and start using your iPad. We're now ready to walk through the settings, remembering that we only will do this on your slot 1 master iPad.
There were some things that happened last year that were really kind of scary. People didn't want some of their privacy issues showing up, and that's what happened. And so we're not going to go into the why of every single thing we're showing you, but just trust us. You will want to set up your iPads this way. For now, just trust us. It's important.
Okay, just to clarify, we are only adjusting settings on iPad number 1 that we just reset to factory. And we get to those settings, of course, by clicking this cogwheel. All right, there are many sections on the left, and then there are corresponding adjustments on the right. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. And the first one we're going to change is the notification section. So I'm going to tap Notifications. And notifications, honestly, are a polite term for interruptions that pop up at your students on their screen. And we want to minimize those distractions. So the way we turn various notifications off is by clicking on each one here and then making adjustments to it. The first one we'll adjust is Game Center. Yours might be in slightly different order. That's okay. We're going to turn the notifications for Game Center off. That doesn't mean they can't use it for educational games. We're going to turn all of these off, though. All of these little sliders that you see, and then we're going to click None. Okay, and then we'll click Notifications up here again to get back to that section. Okay, next one we're going to click is Photos. We're just going to turn that off, as well as these others, the other switches, and the alert style again to none. Messages. We are going to simply turn that off completely, making sure that all switches are off. And FaceTime. We're turning FaceTime off because video conferencing via iPad is a huge bandwidth hog. which we simply don't have the capacities to support. Okay, so back to notifications. Notice here, we'll leave calendar and mail. Notice that those we just adjusted that are no longer in notification mode are listed here below. So if you ever had reason to go back and switch them, this is where you'd find them. All right, next section on the left, the General tab. This is a fairly long section. We're only going to adjust certain parts. First, here where it says Siri, we're just going to double check and make sure that that is switched to off. We want to make sure that iTunes Wi-Fi sync is not enabled. And if it is not, you won't have that choice here, so we're good. Auto lock. So I like to bump that up to at least 5 minutes. Honestly, I tend to set mine to 15 so that they won't accidentally have their screen turning off. Okay. Passcode lock. You need to train your students to never, ever touch this. If they put an auto lock, passcode lock in here themselves and forget it, they will lose their data and you won't have a way of unlocking it. So this is a training issue. Make sure your students are staying out of settings, and especially don't put passcode lock on there. Okay, the very next section, restrictions. This is where teachers can restrict access to things like the camera if you had maybe a discipline problem with that. I highly recommend that you enable restrictions, but don't restrict anything. Why would you do this? Well, by clicking enable restrictions, you'll be prompted for a code, and I'm going to suggest you, the teacher, put in 0000, and of course don't tell your students this. It'll ask you to enter it again, 0000. Why are we doing this if we're not going to restrict? It is so that the students don't get in there and mess around with that and then restrict you after forgetting their code. So by entering it in, we have assured that we have set the code, and do yourself a favor, put in 0000 and you won't forget it. Scrolling down here, we are basically done with the General tab. Okay, so moving over here onto the left-hand side, we're going to skip down to Privacy. The Privacy section is important, and we're going to start at the top with Location Services. That is left on. However, there's a hidden section down here called System Services. Click on that, and we're going to turn off the middle two switches, Diagnostic and Usage, which uses up bandwidth needlessly, and location-based advertisements called iAds. We're going to turn that off as well. Okay, and you're done with the Location System Services section. And so we're going to click here again back to Privacy. Okay, now moving down through the Privacy tab, we're going to double check, making sure that when we click on Photos, I just clicked on the Photo section, that you don't have choices here. And if you do, make sure that it's turned off. On the left, next section, iCloud. Please make sure you're never tempted to enter this with your Apple ID unless you are fully aware of the implications of iCloud. This gets into serious privacy concerns, and for now we're going to leave it alone. We're going to skip the mail section until you set that up later, but we're going to click now on iMessages or Messages. Just like iCloud, make sure that you do not ever enter your Apple ID here. If you do, what can happen is your personal iPhone text messages can begin showing up on iPads. So by never entering this here, you eliminate that risk completely. FaceTime, same thing. Just don't enter your ID and all is well. iTunes and App Stores. Once you enter this section, you will want to go ahead and enter your Apple ID. I'm going to put mine in real quick. Okay, and then you'll have to put in your password. And once you do, you'll see what happens. Click Sign In. Once you've signed in, two extremely important switches appear. Automatic downloads. If you turn these on, apps you download on your personal iPad or iPhone at home will start showing up here. So you want to make sure these are turned off. Moving down to Photos and Camera, we want to just double check that all switches on Photos and Camera are turned off. All right, you are now essentially done with the individual iPad settings that we do on the iPad itself. We're now ready for the next section of the process, and let's look at that together.
Okay, so you just saw how to set up your iPad with the settings. Now we're going to show you how to connect that iPad to iTunes, because there's some settings that can only be done in iTunes.
All right, thank you, Kay. And we are now at the point where we are going to change the settings as Kay described. And I want to just remind you that at the moment, none of the iPads are plugged in, and that's really important. We're only going to plug in our first iPad, because the good news is we only have to change the settings on the one. We can completely ignore the rest for now and only do this one time. Find the iPad you plugged in under Devices. The name it's given by the computer really doesn't matter. We're going to rename it in just a moment. You click on the iPad once, wait about 5 seconds, click again. You just type over it. I'm going to write Master. Okay, and then just simply click out of that, and notice we've changed the name. All right, let's look at each tab. The Summary tab. You want, under Backups, you want this to be backing up to this computer, not iCloud, so make sure that's checked. And we're going to uncheck all the rest of these. Okay, so the only thing checked on this entire tab is this computer, everything else unchecked. Info tab. None of these are checked, and we're going to leave it that way. All right, right onto the Apps tab, and this is a very important tab for one reason. We need this checkbox right here, automatically install new apps, to be checked. This will dramatically increase the speed with which you can add apps to all of your iPads. Okay, and that's it. Moving on to the Music tab. This one offers a choice. If you have installed music you want on all of your iPads, on all of your student iPads, you can click this Sync Music and select Entire Music Library. If, however, you only have certain music that you want on your student iPads, and maybe you have some personal music on here, you can check the second choice, which is Selected Playlists, Artists, Albums, and Genres. And then you're going to have the additional task of making those selections. But if you only have your anthology, CDs, and some kids' music, etc., your life is easier because you can leave Entire Music Library checked. All right, I've clicked the Movies tab. Most of you don't tend to install movies on your student iPads. So for most of you, you can click, or you can uncheck Sync Movies. For those of you that have specific movies that you do want, and you know who you are, of course you can click this and make selections as you wish. Or you can choose to automatically include all of them. But again, most of you won't have movies to install. Okay, moving on to the TV shows. I think it's fairly safe to say most of you do not have this, so I'm just going to uncheck it. Books. Kay and I discussed this extensively and have concluded that your best bet is to leave this checked, but checked selected books. And by doing that, you'll make sure that if you had some books from last year that you really don't want to install, but you're not ready to delete them, this will give you that option, and you can decide which specific books to install. So sync books and then selected books. Audiobooks, most of you do not have purchased audiobooks. So if you leave it checked, that's fine. Nothing will be installed until you made a purchase. Okay, then finally, the Photos tab. This is important. If by chance this has been checked for you, you definitely want to uncheck it. By unchecking it, you'll make sure that every student picture taken on their iPad is not dumped into your iPhoto library, which is what would happen. After you hit the apply button one time, it will appear to sync your entire iPad. What's actually happening is it's just syncing the music that you indicated you wanted it to sync, and then it will stop. And that's what we want. We're to the all-important step of organizing apps on your master iPad. The way you organize this here will be replicated onto all of your other iPads, so we want to spend some time carefully placing apps on screens and in groups if needed. So I'm now going to plug in this one iPad, the one we created as the master, and changed settings on, and you'll notice when I just now plugged it in, you'll see it show up here on the left, showing up as the name we gave to it, master. Okay, so we're going to click on the master in the list. We're interested in the apps tab. Notice that all of the apps listed here these are all the apps that are in your iTunes library right now, and they all have the little button next to them, install. We're not going to use that button to install these, however. We're going to instead drag apps to locations and pages that we want them to appear on our iPad. You have this first page of apps. I would suggest that you go to not page 1 here, but page 2. You've got a nice blank screen to start building your app collections. The organization of apps on your iPads is easiest if you create groups of apps as you go. You're all going to have different selections of apps that you want to install. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the list, and when I find similar category apps, I'm going to drag them over. For example, here's Art Doodles and here are brushes. Those are both apps that we associate with artistic work. So I'm going to drag the first one onto the page, and the way you create a group is simply grabbing another icon, in this case brushes, which would go in a similar group, and I'm going to drop it not next to it, I'm going to take it and drop it right on top. As soon as I drop it on top, it creates my group. I can give it a name. I'll just give it the name Art for now. You might have different names. And then I'm going to continue through my list. If you see another obvious group that you're sure you will want to add to Art, grab it and drop it right onto the same group. Notice that the button next to Crayola has the words will install. So that will happen when we finally sync this app, okay? We've only added a few apps for this demo, but you should have added all of your desired apps at this point. The most important step we need to do now is apply the changes that we've made to this iPad. If we were to create a backup now without applying, we wouldn't have the apps installed. So I'm going to click the apply button here. And depending on how many apps you've installed and how big each of them are, this could take some time. So you can look at the top. We just have a few here. Your times will vary. Alright, we've removed the sync time so that you didn't have to watch it on the video. You'll know it's finished when you just see the Apple icon at the top. We're now ready to create our backup, and that is actually very simple. You're going to right-click on the iPad labeled Master, and we're going to say Backup. Up here it says Backing Up Master because that's what we named it. And with that, you've created the backup that we'll use when we replicate or clone the rest of our iPads. Alright, we're ready to begin the cloning process of all of your other iPads so that their contents match the master. But the first thing you want to do is remove the master from the cart and set it aside, separate from the rest. Then we're going to plug in all of your class set of iPads. So go ahead and plug those into your cart, and as you plug them in, they'll begin to appear on the left with their generic iPad name. Okay, I'm only plugging in 4 for the purpose of demo, but you should have your entire set, minus of course your number 1 iPad, the master. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top iPad in the list, We're going to simply click it, and notice what's on the screen. It's giving you a choice: set up as a new iPad or restore from this backup. We want restore from backup, but be careful. You want to choose that backup that we named master. So I'm going to click that, and I simply click continue. What's cool here is you only have to wait just this little bit. It says the settings for your iPad have been restored. Please leave your iPad connected, blah, blah, blah. You can hit connect. You can go right on to the next iPad. Again, I'm right clicking. Or actually, I can just click here. It says restore from this backup. It's now remembering what I wanted to restore. I can just hit continue. And I can continue through the rest of my list this way. So again, we're waiting about 5 seconds. I click OK on this next little message, and I can click on the very next one on the list already, making sure it still says master, continue. So the great news here is once you've made it through your entire list of 24 or 30 iPads, and they're all set to begin the restore process, you get to walk away, go work in your classroom, and leave this for as long as it takes, even if it's overnight, and let it replicate your full set. So I have one left here. Notice on the left that my first one that's now duplicating just showed up, and it's called master, because that's what we named our original. So within a few minutes, they'll all start to appear. Don't be alarmed. They're supposed to have the same name. We'll rename those later at the end of the entire process. That's the last stage, is renaming them by number and by slot. All right, you're on the home stretch. We're in the final stage, and that's renaming your iPads. But it's important to understand that your computer and iTunes, it doesn't know anything about these slots. All it sees are your 24 or 30 iPads connected. So we need to rename these very carefully so that when we pull iPad slot number 1, that's the iPad from iTunes that we see has been pulled. So we do that in a very special way. All of these are unplugged. Your whole set is unplugged. We're going to start with iPad 2. We plug it all the way in. We immediately go over to iTunes and name it. Okay, so having plugged in slot number 2, if you give it just a moment, it will appear in the list, and of course it says master. So before we plug in number 3, we click it once, wait a couple seconds, click it again, and type 02 to match the slot, and hit enter. Plug in the next one, in case iPad number 3. It appears as master. Click it once, wait, click again, 03, enter. Name that one 03. And the process continues one slot at a time until your entire set is named. So you're going to do this one slot at a time, naming them each in succession until you're done, and then finally you'll plug in your real master into slot number 1 and name it. You're now ready for the final step. With each student iPad, you'll open Settings, and at the very top, you'll select Wi-Fi, and you're going to select LUSD-iPads. The S stands for student. And here you will enter the password that we provide to you via email or via the slip. We can't put that online, but you'll enter it here, and then you'll click Join. Wait for the check mark, and you are done with that iPad. Just repeat this on each iPad in your set, and you are officially ready for use.